The main character knew a world wisdom that if someone sows beans, it is beans that will grow, and if they sow beans, it is beans that will grow. However, strangely enough, there was no law that said the world was always the same. That is why among countless events, as well as between the birth and death of everything that exists, there are bound to be exceptions that will make you wonder if there is such a thing. But by an incredible coincidence, the main character was the exception to the rule. She was born with ram's horns, and it was a common thing. But the main problem was that her parents were lions, and so the girl wondered from childhood why she was the only one who was a sheep. So she and her younger brother were driving to school, and the protagonist, looking at the scenery outside the window, thought that madly does not want to go there. But at that moment, her younger brother turned to her and smiled happily, telling her that he was already going to school. Looking at the boy in front of her, the girl realized that in this world only bloodlines mattered. After all, in their family they married lions and also gave birth only to lions. But for some reason, only with her God played such a cruel joke. Because her mother and father, brother, absolutely all were pure-blooded lions. And she was born a sheep in spite of this. And in this world there was diversity among animals, and there was similar diversity among humans. So with ears or horns on their heads, and even with claws, all people looked completely different. And appearance is determined by what is passed down from generation to generation. That was blood, what they all called lineage. And in order to preserve the purity of blood in society, people considered to have elite lineages, such as predators, joined together. But only the protagonist was born with the lineage of a sheep, which could not happen to a descendant of a lion family. And also the girl constantly attended a private school for predators, and naturally in this place there were no sheep like her. And therefore the main character sincerely hated the eyes of those people who see her as some kind of mutant. Everyone around her wondered if it was just a mutation or adultery, and the girl thought that she couldn't even imagine how many bad words had been said about her and her parents. But she was really lucky that her parents were madly in love with each other, even though their marriage had been arranged. And so instead of hiding her birth and sending her to an orphanage, her family took her in their arms and surrounded her with love. And the girl sitting in class reflected on the fact that it must have been an insanely difficult decision for them, and she was insanely lucky to have a family. But anyway, her parents have been researching each other's family trees ever since. And fortunately, in the process, the reason for her birth was found. The only person who was deliberately erased from the genealogical tree was Sophia's great-grandmother. And then, as a child, the girl, crying, constantly asked her parents why she was a sheep and why she had horns on her head, but her mother calmly explained that her great-grandmother was a sheep. Then she told her daughter that even if they looked a little different, it didn't mean that Lucy was a stranger to them. She had their blood in her, and as a child, Lucy thought seriously that even though she looked like a sheep, she had a lion's heart inside her, just like her parents. Perhaps it was true, but she had a brother when the girl turned 4, and he was born a Leo like their parents. And then the protagonist thought in despair that perhaps some inner part of her was indeed a lion, but she was not at all like a lion and so looked like an alien in her own family. And then the protagonist, remembering her lunch portion at school and at home, wondered how long she could continue to live like this because she was clearly separated from the others and only she had salad on her plate. After that, she thought that in principle it did not matter whether she was a lion or a sheep, because as soon as people saw that her last name was Leopard, they immediately tried to get close to her. Then looking out the window, Lucy realized that it wasn't anyone's fault that she looked like that, but there wasn't a single soul in this place who could understand her and understand her loneliness. And so she wondered if there was something like that somewhere else, like outside of school. Then looking at the teacher, who was diligently explaining the educational material to them, Lucy wondered if there was a person in this world who could feel this loneliness and wondered what could fill such feelings, and whether she would ever be able to find out about it. Although the girl was in class, but she kept thinking about her inner worries. But the next moment she excitedly remembered that today was supposed to be the Soviet reception, and she absolutely did not want to go there. For the community of blood, or as they called the pride, met under the aegis of one common goal. Although it was called a field of exchange to learn the pedigree of each separately, but it was only an excuse. Because if that were the case, there would be herbivores at these gatherings. Whether it was a charity party or a social event, it was all just an excuse. And then the protagonist, who has been to such meetings more than once, could not understand what was the real purpose of meetings of all these people with each other, and perhaps it could be political purposes or the conclusion of marital unions. Afterwards, looking at the desserts that had been prepared for Lucy's guests, she thought that in some cases young men from not very noble families could marry a girl with a good pedigree and join good society. But there was also a case when representatives of families with similar status but different pedigrees married. But the protagonist realized that all this did not concern her at all, even if in her veins flowed the blood of the lion. She could not help the fact that she looked like a sheep, and therefore she does not know if it will be hard to find a friend. But to find a soulmate will definitely be insanely hard. And then she thought that perhaps the child she would give life to in the future would also be a sheep, and she did not want her child to be tormented by the same doubts as she was. Afterwards, looking at the sheets of paper, she stated that when she had spent a small amount of time in social society, laughed and talked to people for a few minutes, she was able to leave quietly and fold her origami in a quiet place. After which she thought about how many dogs she would make today. But at that moment, to my great shock, a young man entered the same balcony with her and looked her over and then smiled, after which he approached and said hello to her. But the protagonist absolutely did not know how to react to this and therefore was in confusion. Then with awkwardness looking at him asked what was going on and warned the guy that apparently he was in the wrong place where he needed. And I asked him to close the door, after which I informed him that she came here first, so the guy had to leave and close the door behind him. He was only excitedly surprised at this attitude, after which he agreed. But he ended up closing the door so no one else could get out and stay with her. The protagonist only looked at the young guy in confusion and wondered why he closed the door but didn't come out and didn't understand what kind of guy he was. But looking at him, she thought it might be because it was night and they were only illuminated by the moonlight, but his eyes really did shine like the purest silver, and she looked at it as if mesmerized, and she didn't know what to make of it. But after awkwardly hiding her hands behind her back, where there was origami, and realized that in principle such behavior on her part was also quite strange. So she was no less strange than the guy that approached her. But at this point, to avoid awkwardness, the guy asked what the girl was doing here and worried that perhaps she was lost. But when she told him that it wasn't true at all, the guy asked where her family was. At this point, the protagonist just awkwardly lowered her head and said she didn't know where she was. And she thought that this guy had probably come to look at her relatives, and she felt really bad about it. But that's when the guy literally glowed and asked me, what was the girl's name, and said his name was Roman. Looking him over carefully, Lucy had absolutely no idea what family this Roman was from, since he did not give his last name. So they met without any introduction or mention of their families. That was how her first meeting with Roman happened. And then the girl looked at him awkwardly and wondered what the guy had not told her about his family. She wondered if she should tell him who her family was, and maybe the young man didn't really know her. Then she began to reflect that all the people who saw her for the first time either started to stare at her in surprise or felt sorry for her, especially since she had never met a romance before. Then she decided to tell him only her first name and no last name. And then the girl said goodbye to him and sat down and went back to folding origami, and just wondered excitedly why the guy wouldn't leave because it was crazy weird behavior. It's not like Roman didn't notice that he was inconveniencing the other person, and maybe it was because he was a dog. But at that moment the guy only sat down to her and happily wagged his tail and told her that Lucy was doing a crazy fun activity, and asked if the girl could also give him a piece of paper so that he could do something similar. Looking carefully at the young man in front of her, Lucy noted that he had a pleasant floral scent, as well as the smell of almonds, and she liked this combination very much. But then she thought that if she did not give him paper, then perhaps he would continue to talk to her. But then she thought that as soon as the guy is bored with it, and he immediately went out, then she started and continued to fold origami. And at that moment, Roman started to do the same, but he was clearly not getting anywhere. Lucy looked at him curiously, then wondered why, at a party where everyone was busy making connections, he was always spending time with her. But then she noticed that Roman had been tearing the paper instead of folding it, and rose indignantly from her seat and yelled at him, telling him that if he didn't like her company so much, he should have said so, and there was no need to take out his anger on paper. But the novel only excitedly and a little frightenedly said that it wasn't that at all. Then, with a maddeningly awkward look, he pricked up his ears and apologized, admitting that he had absolutely no idea how to fold origami. And that's why he did something like this. The protagonist only shouted in frustration and wondered, why did he ask her for paper if he didn't know how to do it at all? It was just stupid. But a flustered Roman rose from his seat, startled to report that he really just wanted to be friends with Lucy, and wondered why she was so sure he liked her. Then the protagonist realized that history was repeating itself, so she smiled and asked him if he was really going to be friends with her. She asked him who ordered him to do something like that, and then said that even if they became friends, she wouldn't tell her family about it, and then began to ponder the fact that apparently Roman had not come here without someone's help. But the guy only looked around at the aristocrats at the reception and wondered why Lucy had spoken abruptly about her family and what her family had to do with their conversation, and then asked, if she was told to make friends with someone she didn't like, would she really be able to do it? Then, pointing to the first aristocrat he saw, he asked if she could make friends with that person. Then Lucy understood what this comparison was about and only laughed, then said that Roman was really very funny and asked if he wanted to learn how to fold origami. Then the guy smiled embarrassedly and asked the girl to teach him how to do it, at which point Lucy wondered if the guy was a dog. He only awkwardly confirmed her guess, and the main heroine, having looked him over, reported that she could guess it at first sight. He only laughed with such a cheerful girl. On the way home, Lucy thought that this day for the first time had fun with a man who had a different pedigree, although their situation was quite similar, although she did not understand why Roman had lied to her after all. In the end, returning home with her parents and brother, the girl thought about the fact that she had eaten absolutely nothing, but although strangely enough, she was not bothered by the feeling of hunger. But seeing the girl, her parents stated that she was insanely happy, and Lucy only smilingly replied to her father that today the piano music was divine, and it was a melody that made the heart beat frantically, but her parents only wondered what she meant. And later Lucy found out that on that day there was no piano accompaniment at the banquet. And then the girl found herself in her room thinking that as soon as she saw the novel she behaved in a madly unfriendly manner and even demanded that he should go away, and wondered to herself why she had done so. Then, remembering the guy's face, she thought that he was just trying to make friends with her. And if you think about it, this was the first time she'd ever been at a party with someone. And today, for the first time in her life, she thought that going to the Soviet reception had been a good idea after all. But after lying in her bed, she thought about the fact that Roman had said he only wanted to be friends with her, and most likely, even then, it wouldn't have benefited him. So she didn't understand such an act on his part. But then, remembering the smiling face of the novel, she thought that they had only talked a little today, and she was madly wondering if the guy had enjoyed their conversation, because she was sure that her words had been hurtful enough. But she was still wondering why Roman had decided to walk up to her as if nothing had happened. And then she wondered that throughout their conversation, Roman had never paid any attention to her horns. And she wondered if it would be nice if they could just once meet again. Then she turned around and fell into a dream and thought that this feeling was caused by the fact that the guy was the only person who treated her in a friendly and welcoming way. But then she thought that maybe he was just such a person, and so next time he would definitely approach someone else. Then she began to wonder if she would be able to meet him at the next social gathering, and if he would talk to her again. In the end, the girl started to get ready for the next social gathering and thought about the fact that the day had finally arrived and wondered if the earrings she had chosen would look good on her. At that moment, she was approached by her younger brother, who looked at her sister with a smile and told her that whatever she wore, she would still look beautiful, but she only added embarrassedly that she wasn't doing it to look good. But the brother only smilingly looked at his excited sister and asked, was she going to meet someone? And Lucy, literally stammering with worry, said that it was not so and asked who she could meet at such a reception. Then she took off her earrings and thought about the fact that she wasn't doing it to please anyone, and realized that she had probably spent too much time preparing for the reception, so she shouldn't have worn her earrings. The girl ended up at the reception and wondered if she'd really come all the way to the party to see someone. But finally, when she stepped out onto the balcony, the silver hair of the novel that shimmered so beautifully in the night light shone before her eyes again. And then she went to the balcony to say hello to the young man, who excitedly said that he was worried that the girl might not come today, although he wanted to see her very badly. But Lucy only looked at the foliage on the plants that grew here and wondered why Roman was so worried about it, and wondered what they should talk about. Then she asked if Roman wanted to fold origami again like last time. And the guy only glowingly reported that it wasn't bad at all. And then scrutinizing him, Lucy was glad that the guy had ears and tail, as she could understand the sincerity of his desires. But at that moment, she took a close look at Roman and asked what school he went to. Lucy, she was a student at Urbana High, and the boy was from Jupentia High. And then looking at the attentive guy who was doing origami, she stated that the school he was studying at, to get in, you had to belong to a really good family, and people from such families tend to shine in society. So she didn't understand why she hadn't met Roman before. Then she thought that when the aristocracy collapsed, the bourgeois era began, and she had heard that many members of the new classes who were newly educated had pedigree dogs. And it is said that such families are despised, and that is why they are not invited to social gatherings and are secretly banished. And perhaps it is because of this that the Roman family started to receive invitations to social events too late. But afterwards she got excited, looking over at the guy, thinking that if he kept playing with just her, things could end badly. And if he's really at a social gathering for the first time, that's not what he should be doing right now. And even if it's not right now, the novel will have to try to make as many social connections as possible. Then she awkwardly thought that she had apparently taken control of a child who knew absolutely nothing about society, since she had recently found herself in it, so she wondered if his parents would say anything to him if he spent all this time with her. But he just calmly looked at her and said that his parents would not say anything because his father was not here. Then the protagonist asked about his mother, but he calmly said that she was dead. Then the protagonist got excited, approached him and apologized for her words, and thought that she was very stupid for thinking that all the parents in the world were alive and well. Then with an insanely guilty look said that she was insanely careless, and she just wanted to say that usually these events are counted together with the parents. At that moment, Roman smiled madly at her, touched her arm, and told her that she didn't need to apologize for something like that, because he had come along with his older brothers. Excited, she wondered what he meant. And then Roman said he was the youngest third son in the family, at which point Lucy asked him if he and his brothers were okay with his brothers, and he calmly informed her that they were always fighting. When Lucy heard this, she laughed, and then thought that perhaps he had used that word because they were dogs. Then she admitted to herself that when she had seen him smile as he talked about his brothers, she had assumed that they were probably well enough related to each other. The girl said that she had a younger brother too, but he hadn't come here. Roman only asked about the reason. Lucy explained that he didn't want to go to a place like this because it was more like an exhibition. And at this point, he only excitedly asked if everything was okay with the main character, but she calmly informed him that she had come because if she hadn't, her parents would have been very upset. But at that moment, Roman said that it was a huge relief for you, and seeing the questioning and incomprehensible look of the protagonist, said that whatever the reason for her coming here, the most important thing is that they still managed to see each other, and he met her. Lucy was only excited and a little embarrassed to look at his face. She wondered if he was so happy to see them, but he sincerely said that he was actually very happy about it. Looking at him closely, the girl noticed that he was wagging his tail, and maybe it was because he was the youngest in the family, and most likely his training in hiding his emotions was still ongoing. At that point, Roman asked if she was good with her little brother, but the flustered protagonist said she didn't even know for sure. Roman wondered if they fought a lot, but Lucy calmly explained that they absolutely never did, and her younger brother never fought with her, so she didn't know how good their relationship was. Then she thought about the fact that her brother couldn't possibly fight with his sister, because to Louis she was probably just an unreliable older sister. At this point, a slightly alarmed Roman wondered if the protagonist thought that the fact that they do not fight this is bad. After all, members of his family are always arguing with each other when they are bored. But the protagonist only tried to somehow brighten the situation, said that since Roman had 2 older brothers, she will give her 2 paper dogs as a gift. After that, she noted that all the origami paper was finished and looked carefully at the novel, thinking that she would like to try to do what she had read about in the book, but she wondered if it would be too rude of her. So she excitedly, looking at the guy in front of her, asked if she could do what she wanted and explained that she had previously read in books that if you pet a dog on the head, all the accumulated stress would disappear. Roman only glared at her excitedly. And at that moment, Lucy realized that apparently it was too much and informed him that he was absolutely right if he didn't like it. After all, if she touched his hair, her hair would be ruined, and apologized for being so inconsiderate. But at that moment, the guy only reported that she was absolutely right and bowed her head and asked to be stroked. And Lucy only got excited, looking at the guy's bowed head, asked, could she really do something like that? And when she touched his hair, he made a sound like a wolf's howl. So the girl stopped abruptly. But at that moment, the madly embarrassed Roman asked if she could go on and pet him a little more, because he liked it so much. At that moment, Lucy only thought about whether dogs really make such sounds and was madly unsure about it, but she thought that it didn't matter whether Roman was a dog, a cat, or something else. He had to have friends anyway. At that moment, looking at Lucy carefully, when it was time to say goodbye, Roman asked if they could meet again at the next social gathering, but she replied that she wasn't sure. Then she smilingly looked at his worried face and explained that, first of all, she didn't know when the next social gathering would take place, because this kind of event is not held on a strictly chosen date. But seeing the guy's insanely sad face, she told him she couldn't make him a promise, but would love to meet him again and spend time together. Eventually, after some more time, the girl was riding in a carriage with her parents back to their estate and thought that perhaps they should exchange contact information. But after getting excited, she realized that they hadn't become that close of friends yet and so were unlikely to meet anywhere else. Then sadly realized that Roman might suffer for spending time with someone who didn't fit the common standards like her. So she looked down sadly and said that it would be much better if the guy remained just a friend she saw at social gatherings. Afterwards, while drinking her tea at home, she thought that when she thought about it alone, it seemed to her that she didn't understand something at all. So she turned to her mother and asked how she should behave with her friends, because she didn't understand it at all. Then she explained that today she had said something rude to her friend. But at that moment, her father joined in the conversation, and looking at Lucy, he asked her excitedly if she had made a friend. She only replied that she couldn't call him her friend yet, but they were still having a very pleasant time together. And then her father still excitedly asked who this man was. And Lucy just thought about the fact that she had never had any friends. So she was a little confused and absolutely did not understand what her relationship with Roman was. And then with a smile said that if she told her father about it, he would hardly know this man anyway, and then said good night to her parents and said that she would be in her room. As she walked down the corridors, Lucy thought about the fact that she had only seen Roman twice and that Roman still hadn't told her his last name, and began to think about the reason why Roman wouldn't call her. Why Roman wouldn't tell her his last name? Because if he really just didn't care about it, in that case, the guy would seem even more special among the others. Bottom line, after a while, the protagonist found herself at another reception and excitedly informed the novel that she and he had met a little earlier than she had anticipated. And by some strange coincidence, there are quite a few social events this month. After which she awkwardly reflected on the fact that they now saw each other about once a week and informed him that it wasn't even winter and the end of the year yet, but somehow the charity receptions were every week. The guy only awkwardly looked at the protagonist and wondered. She didn't like it when there were so many social gatherings. But she calmly said, smiling, that it wasn't like that at all, and she was glad because she could see her friend. And then she said that there were also rumors that the Baskerville family was behind the organization of all these social events. The coat of arms of the Baskerville family is a white-crowned wolf, and the main character said that most likely this family is currently up to something. Everyone knows that this family is known for its wealth, and she heard that they are organizing all these events as they are trying to get into politics. And then I realized that this family was famous for being after the war. They quickly got back on their feet and became the creators of a leading transnational corporation with branches all over the world. But at that moment, from something maddeningly agitated, Roman reported that that wasn't true at all and admitted that Baskerville did do charity work. But charity was about sharing what one had with another person who needed it. But the protagonist only smiled at him and told the novel that apparently he was. She was still insanely naive, but admitted that she was still insanely happy that they could meet him this time and have fun. Then looking at his embarrassed face, she thought that after several such meetings, a certain agreement had naturally arisen between them. And on entering the hall, they greeted each other with their eyes. Then they avoided prying eyes and looked for a secluded place, and in this way they met more than 10 times. And at one of the receptions, the protagonist told her friend that she thought the balcony was too open, so she asked how the novel felt about them going inside. He just looked at her worriedly and wondered if she wanted to go back to the banquet hall. If she wanted to go back to the banquet hall, she calmly informed him that she didn't. Then she moved closer and whispered in his ear that she wanted to go to a place where there was no one at all. And so they were in one of the rooms, and Lucy said that she had brought the shiny paper today, but asked that when Roman saw it, he not be too surprised, because it was really hard to find. After which the girl thought about the fact that despite the fact that he was both already 15 years old, they spent the rest of the year just sitting on the bed and folding origami. And Roman always carried with him folded figures made of paper, which he kept as if they were some valuable treasure. And besides origami figures, Lucy began to bring him food often. And one time a guy, having eaten a piece of meat, excitedly looked at the main character and apologized, saying that he should not have eaten such a thing in front of her at all, and asked if it was mutton. But the protagonist only exhaled with a smile and said that she wasn't a real sheep, and besides, there was nothing wrong with Roman eating meat, and it wasn't a big deal either, so he shouldn't have worried so much about it. He said that she was used to this kind of thing in her life, and she was very different from her family. He was only surprised. I don't know if that's possible. And she said with a smile that this was what happened, and so the food in their family was also very different. And if you think about it, almost all social event attendees are carnivores. After that, looking at the shocked face of the novel, Lucy said that she understood that it was quite difficult to show attention to such different people like her, and therefore most people were not worth sacrificing for her, and she was already used to it. Roman looked at her and asked her why she thought she should get used to something like this. Lucy didn't seem to understand the question, and Roman explained that he meant that Lucy didn't need to get used to discomfort because it would be wrong if she got used to behaving like this. But at this point, the girl had absolutely no idea how to react to something like this. Then informed me with some awkwardness that for her to demand that her family accommodate her food preferences is one kind of violence, but then informed me that it would be insanely nice if she had the pedigree of a dog or something other than that. After which she confessed to the novel that as a child she always wanted to believe that she was a foster child, and she thought that somewhere she would have a real family that would take her in. But of course, she had also been taught that her appearance didn't matter at all, and that being different wasn't bad at all. And so Lucy knew that this was true. But at that time, she had not yet realized what her reality would be. And she couldn't talk to anyone because she felt like she was slowly becoming invisible in this place. So she was insanely lonely. And all through her childhood, she was addressed as Poor Lucy. And so for a while, she started to believe that was really her name, and thought that if her family went to a desert island, she'd be the first to be eaten. But after looking at the horrified face of the novel, apologized and said that she had started too serious conversation. But he only looked at her carefully and said that she had to get over such difficulties with a smile. And then he took the broccoli and started eating it. And the main character was just shocked and wondered what he was doing. But he looked her over calmly and told her it was quite good in taste. Then he asked, Did Lucy still think he was the majority who couldn't eat such food for the rest of their lives? After that, he resolutely rose from his seat and walked around the room and said that dogs are omnivorous. There was even a saying that a dog can eat grass, but the protagonist only thought that this saying meant that the man was doing something strange and illogical. And then the guy sat down on the bed and said that he could also eat greens and fruit. And so if they were on a deserted island with her, they could get along just fine together, just as they do now. Lucy smiled and told the guy to stop joking like that and said that she thought the party was ending and that they should leave. But a flustered Roman only wondered if it was true that it was time to say goodbye. Is it really true that it was time for them to say goodbye? And the protagonist with a smile said that she realized that because the music had already stopped playing. So she suggested that they slowly pack up and leave. Roman said with a maddening longing that he would like to be with Lucy at least a little. But at that moment, the mother of the main character came into the room where the young people were and excitedly looked at them and asked what was going on here and what they were doing together. And then the main character. After a while, she found herself in the carriage and remembered everything that had happened. And the moment that when her mother came into the room, she was madly excited and tried to explain to her that Roman was her friend and that she should not think anything bad about the two of them. Then she added that while they were sitting here, they were standing and folding origami. But after that, she started to force the boys out of the room and said that his brothers were probably waiting for him, so she advised him to go to them quickly. And her mother only carefully looked at the novel and realized that this boy was a wolf, which meant he was a Baskerville. After which her parents looked at the protagonist and wondered, was this guy really the friend she had told me about earlier? And the protagonist only nervously reported that it really happened. So after that, she thought she hoped her mom wouldn't think badly of the affair because of a situation like this. And remembering the guy realized that for the first time in all her 15 years of life, she had a friend who was insanely sensitive and attentive, and remembering him, all the girl's face covered with a blush of embarrassment. But her parents looked at her worriedly and said that even if he was her friend, they shouldn't be in the room alone because it didn't look good from the outside, and even more so considering the child's family. But the protagonist only excitedly reported that she hadn't thought about how others would look at it, and informed her parents that if they were going to tell her anything regarding the affair, she wouldn't listen, because she wasn't seeing him because of his parents. Then she awkwardly informed him that Roman was an insanely kind and sensitive guy, and he was the first to approach her, and never once focused on her appearance. And that's why she liked him. At this point, the parents just looked at each other carefully, and the father of the protagonist told his wife that in such a case they could not do anything, and having friends was really important. And so they would turn a blind eye to what kind of family he was from, but warned that it only applied to friends. After a while, Lucy found herself at home and began to ponder what they were to each other, and she thought that she knew absolutely nothing about this guy. She knew absolutely nothing about what his favorite food was or what he was into, and she also knew nothing about him, as if this person was a stranger to her. After which I thought sadly that she should have asked him a lot more questions. Afterwards, when I remembered his face, I realized that I only knew his name, that he didn't have a good relationship with his father, and that he had 2 older brothers, and that his mother was dead. And then she thought sadly that all she'd been doing all this time was folding origami with him, and that she'd been too selfish. And she promised herself that if they met next time, she should be sure to ask him what he liked and where he lived. Then she thought that she should apologize to him, because she hadn't listened to what he wanted to say, and he had a rather surprised look on his face. Then she thought that perhaps they might become estranged because of what had happened, and she didn't know what she should do. Bottom line, after a while, the protagonist was again at the reception and excitedly walked around in search of the novel and realized that he was nowhere at all, and did not understand where he so suddenly disappeared, because she could not even apologize to him. Then she looked around excitedly and sadly realized that she didn't even know where the guy lived, and maybe he wouldn't even show up at today's reception. But at that moment, a young man grabbed her by the shoulder and turned to her, who was an exact replica of Roman, and smiling. The guy said he was the older brother of this girl's friend, and said that Roman had talked about her a lot. The protagonist only looked at him in surprise and thought that the guy was really insanely tall and wondered if he was really her brother. She wondered if he was really her brother, and he confirmed her words and asked if he should introduce himself first, and then said that his name was Harold Baskerville. The protagonist only looked at him shocked and wondered if he was really a Baskerville. Then she thought about the fact that the Baskervilles are a family with whom her family is on bad terms, and she has seen her parents suffer many times because of the struggle with this family. And from a political point of view, the Baskervilles were fierce opponents of their family. So everyone thought they were a rather unpredictable family whose size defies the world. Whereupon she remembered that their coat of arms was a crowned white ox. Then immediately excitedly realized that now Roman's older brother that was in front of her was a wolf, and then excitedly realized that Roman was indeed from the Baskerville family. Thinking back on their conversation, she remembered that while she hadn't insulted his family, she had spoken a little strangely about them. But then she remembered that before that, the guy had definitely called himself a dog. And remembering him, she didn't understand why he lied to her, and why he was a Baskerville. Not a dog, but a wolf Baskerville, and her parents probably knew about it from the beginning. After that, the girl thought about the fact that she could believe this wolf brat and trusted him, and he had deceived her. And it wasn't that he hadn't told her about it right away. It's that he deceived her. And then she thought about how she didn't know who she trusted until now. She even told him things she'd never told anyone before. And in the end, he betrayed her. But at that moment, she was approached by the herald, who asked if the protagonist had ever had measles, and then said that his younger brother had gotten it somewhere, and said that it was strange enough, because they had always taken all the precautions. At this point, the protagonist only became agitated, looking at him inquiringly. Was Roman really very sick? But the herald calmly explained that his brother was already better, as he had already begun to heal. Then informed that if the girl was immune to the disease, she might like to visit the novel, and inquired how she looked upon such a thing. After that, he extended his hand to her, and looking at the face of her elder brother Roman, the protagonist thought about the fact that today was the first time she received an invitation to visit, and she had never had such an experience. And it was an invitation from the Baskerville family. And then scrutinizing Lucy's distracted face, the herald informed him that his little brother missed her madly. Eventually, the herald along with the protagonist approached her parents, and then the young man reported that his brother and the girl were still young. And besides, they had really become good friends. So he was willing to take all the responsibility so that her parents really didn't have to worry about anything. Her parents only looked at them uncertainly and didn't know what to say. And then the protagonist excitedly said that she really wanted to see Roma, since this guy was her friend, but more importantly that Roma missed her. Then, remembering the face of that always smiling boy, she realized that she wanted to be as thoughtful to him as Roman had been to her. Though she admitted to herself that even though the relationship between her family and the Baskervilles was not good, she still had to come and see him. At this moment, after thinking a little, her father approached her and stroked her on the head and told her that he was giving his consent, for friendship was really insanely important. Then asked the girl not to linger. Then the protagonist in the carriage thought that, as far as she knew, after the death of his wife, the grief-stricken master of the house had been living in seclusion for 10 years, and his eldest son ran the business. So Mr. Harold is the second son in charge of the household, and she had heard that the younger son had not yet been introduced to high society. And then she realized that she had previously thought the boy was younger than she was, which was why he had introduced himself so late, but she had never imagined that the younger brother was Roman. Followed by a flustered thought that she had absolutely no intention of offending him or his family. But he did look like a dog, not a wolf. Watching Lucy's confusion like that, the herald only thought she looked insanely funny from the outside. But afterward, the girl wondered why the guy had deceived her after all, and came to the conclusion that it might have had something to do with the fact that her family and the Baskervilles were really feuding with each other. But she couldn't understand how the novel could deceive her with such an innocent face. But at that moment, the herald smilingly looked at the view outside the window and said that they were almost there, and so they would need to get out soon. At this point, the protagonist, excitedly looking around the estate they had arrived at, realized that she had just received an invitation to visit the residence of the Baskerville family, but she had absolutely brought no gift with her. So excitedly informed the herald that alas, she had no gift. He said that if Lucy really wanted to make a present, she should have told Roman what she had told her parents earlier and promised that he would really like it. Then the protagonist is excited, looking at the herald, wondered how at all Roman imagined her when he told his brothers about her. After all, she really cared about being so friendly to her. In the end, after a while, the girl found herself in the estate of Baskerville and looked around excitedly. And at that moment, the herald approached her and informed her that since the girl was his unexpected gift to the affair, perhaps they were to enter secretly. And the protagonist just thought that maybe if they were fooling around like that, it was an indication that they were really close. Then, looking at the herald's enthusiastic face, she thought that the man was probably really attached to his brother. But after a while they got to the door and the herald knocked and asked if his brother was well and if he was feeling better so that he could visit him. But the romance at the door only grudgingly asked him to shut up. And then the herald, with a glance at the protagonist, whispered to her that she could already come in. But for now he would go for dessert for the two of them and would be back soon. But when the girl entered, a pillow was thrown in her face and Roman, before he realized who had entered, shouted at his brother and said that earlier he had warned him not to show up. But after looking at Lucy's frightened and crying face, he excitedly ran up to her and asked her how she had come to be here and how it could be real at all. Then he immediately began to apologize to her madly and asked her if she had hurt herself. And then, sitting down on the floor with a worried look on her face, he asked her to move her hands away a little and wondered if her nose was bleeding, and asked again how she had gotten here. But at that moment, the girl grabbed a pillow and immediately started beating the novel, saying that earlier he had lied to her, and inquired, did the novel really think the Baskervilles were dogs? Afterwards, also angrily continuing to beat him, she informed him that if Baskervilles were dogs, then her family were cats, but he only excitedly asked her to listen to him and stop beating him. After all, he didn't have a reason to say such a thing. But the girl was filled with anger because she realized the guy had been cheating on her for 6 months. So there was no easy forgiveness. But in the end, the next moment, the herald entered the room with the eldest son of the Baskerville family and informed him that the sick man should by no means miss dessert. But they ended up excitedly watching a picture of the main character violently continuing to beat up their little brother. At that moment, she was approached by an excited herald who asked with a smile on his face. The girl stopped and said that when she swung, she had to use her back. And now there was a lot of empty space in front of her, which allowed her to strike a good blow. But disgruntled Roman only shouted at him and wondered. It was his idea to bring Lucy here so suddenly without warning. But he looked only into his little brother's disgruntled face and told Lucy that she had to give his little brother a good beating and asked them not to pay attention to them. After which they pushed Alexander out of the room and told him that they had just brought them desserts and were leaving, wishing them a pleasant appetite and good luck. In the end, when the door closed, the beaten Roman wondered. She was really hurting him because he was still a patient and was still in pain from her blows. At this moment, the protagonist threw back her pillow and, looking in all seriousness into the face of the novel before her, inquired why one of the Baskervilles had been deceiving her all this time. But he only covers his madly sad face with his hands and asked Lucy not to call him that. After all, he was only a novel, and the protagonist, looking at him, thought that even when he cries he starts to howl like a wolf, and this child was really one of the Baskervilles. Then she sat down at the table and took a cup of tea and began to think about the fact that it looked like she had embarrassed herself in front of Roman's brothers. After all, they had brought her here because she was a friend of their younger brother, and she had taken to beating a sick child. Then she thought that as a member of her family, she had behaved rather rudely. But then she wondered why the novel was crying so desperately now. After all, she was the person who should be crying. Then, looking around excitedly, she asked him to come closer to her as she had an insane amount of questions she wanted to ask him. He just sat down across from her excitedly and wondered. The main character only scrutinized him and wondered if she should hate him because he was ugly. But at that moment, as Roman cried, he wondered, Had he really gotten ugly? And he started crying even more. And Lucy was just excited, looking at him and thinking that when a guy cries, he looks more like a dog mixed with a wolf or vice versa. But after getting excited, she approached him and asked him to stop crying because he wasn't really ugly. And she too had this disease when she was 7 years old. So Bill passed soon. Then she told him that he actually looked fine and everything was fine, and she was just making a joke like that. Then looking at his crying face, she told him that he shouldn't hide his face when she talks to him anyway. And Roman only wondered excitedly, did she care, even though she hated wolves? But at this point, she didn't understand why he was asking something like that and wondered why she was angry with him. But Roman was still in tears and said that the girl was angry because he was one of the wolves. She was just thinking about the fact that Roman was talking nonsense, and because of his lies, and he also happened to be a Baskerville. So she did not understand how such a thing could be hidden, because she shared with them all her experiences, and then remembering the past, which bound them, still absolutely did not understand why the novel decided to get close to her, and did not understand whether he really decided to just mock her. So she looked at him unhappily and wondered if that was the reason he had decided to keep his identity secret, and asked. She wondered if he had spoken to her out of sympathy, or because she looked unusual, or if he had just made an argument with someone. But at that moment Roman, who had risen from his seat, informed her that that was not at all the case, and asked why Lucy had said something like that. But the girl resolutely demanded that he tell her the truth about his intentions. And then Roman was madly embarrassed to tell her that actually the relationship between their families wasn't very good, and he really wanted to look good in her eyes. And anyway, the relationship between a wolf and a sheep isn't usually very good either. At which point the girl, if sincere, laughed and asked, did Roman really think that if he was a dog, they would be good friends? And added that she had previously revealed that her family were lions, so it made absolutely no difference who he really was, and told the confused guy that whoever he was, she was absolutely fine with it, and asked why he had chosen dogs. But he only looked into Lucy's laughing face to inform her that he had previously thought dogs were friendlier with sheep, as there are dogs that are bred to be shepherds. But then Roman realized he'd said something nonsensical, and asked Lucy to pretend she hadn't heard. And the girl only wondered, was Roman really going to become a shepherd dog and put her behind a fence? But he embarrassedly remarked that he had absolutely no idea why he had acted in such a way, but added that he had only fooled her once and asked her to forgive him this time. At this, the girl reached out her hand to stroke his head, but he asked her not to do so, for he was not thinking well enough now. And an agitated Lucy inquired what this was about, for earlier the Herald had reported that Roman was almost well, but he only hid his face in embarrassment, saying that he still thought it was all a dream. He couldn't believe it was true, because how could the girl be in his room? Looking around at such an embarrassed guy, Lucy only smiled, realizing that this was indeed the same romance she knew. So she wondered when he would be fully recovered. But he just bowed his head and said that he was completely healthy, and added that it wasn't about the disease at all. And anyway, seeing such a confused face of the novel, Lucy only thought about the fact that the guy looked insanely nice, and said that she was insanely glad that they could see each other. But then a flustered Roman asked how she had managed to get here, but she calmly informed him that his older brother had brought her here. And he just started cursing at him and informed her that his brother was really a real lunatic and apologized for everything coming out so spontaneously. And then, thinking about these words, the protagonist realized that the Herald was actually very good at both business and politics, but since Roman spoke of him as a psycho, it was likely that the two had a very friendly relationship indeed. But at that moment she was distracted by an excited Roman, who apologized again, informing Lucy that it was entirely his fault. But she calmly informed him that nothing bad had happened, because it was really nice for her to meet his older brother. Especially, he confessed that Roman had told her a lot about her before. But at that moment, he only rose from his seat to report that nothing of the sort had happened, and he had said nothing about her, but Lucy had only asked that he stop deceiving her. Then, at that moment, Roman added about what he had not said. anything bad about her. Lucy thanked him for his honesty and told him that it was something she should have said from the beginning. Then she looked at him carefully and admitted that the herald hadn't said anything special. He only said that his illness would go away if she visited him, and asked how it was that he had caught colds, since it was usually contracted in childhood. But after awkwardly looking at the girl, Roman asked, "Did the herald say he was sick with measles?" And then by his reaction, the protagonist realized that apparently the herald had told Roman something strange about his illness. But at that moment, the protagonist looked at him and asked if they were still friends. And when she received his affirmative answer, she said that she had a lot of questions for him, because regardless of his diet, sex, and origin, she cared about what he liked, not counting origami folding. But Roman, madly embarrassed looking at the girl in front of him, admitted that he had no special love for anything, but afterwards awkwardly said that he liked ball games. Hearing this, the girl realized that he liked active sports and asked if he had any other hobbies. But the flustered Roman only wondered why the girl suddenly decided to ask such questions, but she calmly inquired, did Roman not like that she asked such questions, and said that in such a case he could also ask her what he was worried about, and they would ask each other in turn. In the end, after time and a lot of mutual questions, the protagonist asked if Roman had any other friends besides her, for example at school, but he calmly said that he did not have any other friends. The protagonist just calmly waved her hands and assured the novelist that everything was fine, and this question was not offensive to her, as he was her best friend. After which she inquired whether she was also the best friend for the novel. He, after a little hesitation, embarrassedly replied that he did indeed consider her insanely important. And then the girl, delighted with such an answer, asked if the guy could give her his contact information. He promised that he would send a man to her in her estate. Hearing about it, the heroine joyfully suggested that they should definitely meet when he recovers and be somewhere other than the banquet hall. Well, at this moment, they were distracted by Alexander, who entered the room and approached the protagonist, said that he would like to talk to her a little. Lucy excitedly agreed, and then began to think about the fact that the oldest of the brothers of the novel has an insanely frightening expression on his face. And perhaps it was due to the fact that she had recently hit his younger brother, and this led to a conflict between the families. But at that moment, Alexander smiled and thanked the girl for coming to visit them, and informed her that her parents had already sent a carriage for her. After which he scrutinized his brother and informed him that it was time to say goodbye. In the end, when they were walking from putting the girl in the carriage, then Roman informed that his oldest of brothers already had a girlfriend, and the main character excitedly informed that she already knew about it, and she heard it from her parents. And then she realized that she'd said earlier that position or family didn't matter to her. But I guess she lied a little, because even if she didn't want to know, she would have heard a rumor somewhere. Especially when it comes to the Baskervilles, because people are very interested in who marry the sons of such a powerful family. And almost everyone knows that Alexander met with a girl not from a noble family. And in addition, the Baskervilles are known for attending all sorts of social gatherings, but at the same time are not going to marry by agreement. And because of this, there are also a lot of strange rumors. At that moment, she looked carefully at Roman in front of her, and he only smiled embarrassedly and asked what she wanted to say to him. Seeing such a sincere to her boyfriend, Lucy thought about the fact that Roman was insanely innocent and sweet, and she mentally confessed to him that she liked him a lot. In the end, when the girl sat in the carriage, the guy handed her a soft toy in the form of a lamb and said that it was his gift that he wanted to give her. The protagonist, holding the toy in her hands, thought about the fact that it was insanely soft and wondered where he managed to buy it. But Roman smilingly said that he had found this lamb in the market square and it looked just like Lucy, so he wanted to buy it. Then, wagging his tail in embarrassment, he told the girl that he would contact her and would look forward to their next meeting. In the end, when she said goodbye to him, Lucy rode home in her carriage and thought that the Baskerville family never married by arrangement, but whoever they married always had children only with the pedigree of a wolf, and only males were born. And also this family was known for the fact that I have never had children out of wedlock. Thinking about this, Lucy thought that indeed all three brothers were insanely similar to each other as matryoshka dolls of different sizes. But she could not stop thinking about her family, how to explain it all to them. Because she came to visit empty-handed, and now she's coming home with a gift. But scrutinizing her toys, she admitted that it was as soft as Roman's hair when she stroked it. In the end, Roman was able to fully exhibit after the holidays, and then the protagonist, dressed in clothes for horseback riding, and cheerfully greeted him. Then I got closer and noticed a change in his hair, and he asked me if I liked it and if it looked weird. The girl only smiled happily and said that she really liked his appearance and it suited him well. Roman was madly embarrassed and happy to hear such a compliment. After that, they went to the racetrack, and after waiting for Roman to settle his horse, Lucy asked if Roman knew how to ride a horse, because earlier he said that he was not very good at it. After that, she promised that she would teach him. Eventually, as they rode, the main character helped him out a bit and praised him for doing everything correctly, then informed him that Roman was really good at it, and it was most likely due to the fact that he had good motor skills. She wanted to see him shaking like a lamb, but as she looked at him, she thought about the fact that she didn't understand why Roman had said earlier that he couldn't ride horses. But she thought she liked having fun that way a lot better. Eventually, it was time for the horses to rest, and then over a cup of tea, Roman confessed that he was actually insanely nervous as it was the first time they were meeting somewhere outside. Then the protagonist sipped her tea. I wondered, did Roman think they'd be bored if they met somewhere else and had nothing to talk about? But the boy only excitedly said that he wasn't worried about it because he'd never be bored around Lucy, and that wasn't what he wanted to say at all. Then excitedly added that he was actually worried that the girl might be bored in his company, and then she only smiled when she saw his excitement, and remembered that it was the same thing with her, and she couldn't even sleep because she spent the whole night thinking what they could do in the evening. And she thought that the novel said he liked active sports, but she didn't know anything about soccer. After that, she started to think that she should have offered to take her to a quiet place to eat some sweets. But afterwards, she realized that it seemed that she had been too insistent in asking to go horseback riding. But she admitted to herself that it was really because she had never taken up any other sport. Then, smiling at the excited romance, she informed him that in fact she too was madly worried about how the day would go, but she noticed that the horse's break was over and offered him a little more riding. In the end, they had a crazy good time, and the main character suggested that they should definitely meet and have fun in the same way next time. Then Roman suggested that they meet next week. In the end, when they were done with the horseback riding, Lucy stated that it had been really fun and that the other kids were spending their time that way too, and she thought that the fact that she really had a friend was the greatest event in her life. After that, looking back at the smiling face of the novel, she thought about the fact that most likely this guy absolutely does not realize how grateful she was to him. After all, after everything that had happened, they really became insanely good friends. Baskervilles and the leopardess, the wolf and the sheep, and the girl knew very well how strange their intercourse looked. For it was a very unusual combination, even if they were merely near each other. But she realized that the weight of the world was crazy weird, so it seemed to her that it would be better if they were all equal and had no ears or scales or tails or fangs, and maybe there was a world like that somewhere. But as long as she didn't pay any attention to the pedigrees, she began to like Roman more and more each time, especially his tail, because Roman's tail was constantly wagging from side to side, and so Lucy was sure she liked him too, and she never once doubted this guy. After all, this was exactly the kind of Roman that was insanely sweet to her heart. Eventually, it was spring, and an excited Roman asked the protagonist if she felt any discomfort because she was socializing with him. But she just calmly said that she wouldn't talk to him if she felt uncomfortable. Then she asked what the question was about. But after looking at him excitedly, she wondered if she should write him a letter with their family seal. But then suddenly, the boy asked her what she thought of him. And Lucy was only excited. Looking around her, said that she did not understand the purpose of the question, because of course she considered him her best friend, because he was the kindest wolf among all the people she knew, and even the kindest man in the world. But then the excited Roman said that he actually wanted to confess something to confess to the girl, and said that he was really only kind to her. The protagonist heard about it and only laughed, and reported that it was really crazy surprising because she, on the contrary, was rude only with Roman, but he excitedly looked at her and said that he did not think she was bad. But the girl said that all this was due to the fact that she was a sheep, and if she had been a Leo, no one would have said anything about the two of them. But he only got agitated and said that they had already agreed not to bring up the subject again, because he was glad that she was a sheep. At that moment, Lucy looked him over carefully and wondered, did it mean that he liked her just because she was born a sheep? And he'd approached her because she was the only one in the banquet hall who was not a predator. Roman only hesitated to report that no matter who the girl was born to be, he would still like her. But now she was a sheep, and so he couldn't even imagine if she were anything else. Hearing this, the protagonist only smiled excitedly and then thought that in this world, Roman was really the most empathetic wolf and said that the guy really liked her madly, and she hoped that their friendship would last forever. She looked at him and told him that she would like to stay that way forever, even if they grew up, and asked him if that was what the boy wanted. He said, a little disappointed, that if that was Lucy's wish, he would accept it. As a result, a few days before this conversation, Roman was riding in a carriage with his brothers, and the herald asked why the boy was sitting with such a displeased face, then said that his brothers should have just admitted that he was also one of the Baskervilles. Then he added that their peculiarity was indeed a family embarrassment, but the guy would feel a little better if he could finally admit it, because he was already 16 years old, and he was still folding origami in the banquet hall, and rides horses at the racecourse. Then he looked him over carefully and asked him how long he was going to keep doing that and behaving like that. He was, after all, a Baskerville. After which he inquired whether he had not, or had previously, been riding all the night before their date, and inquired what Lucy thought of it. Afterwards he added that Roman shouldn't be so careless, because the girl understood exactly everything, and she knew perfectly well that Roman loved her, and despite this she continued to ignore his love. But Roman only grudgingly turned around, asking his brother to shut up as soon as possible. But he exhaled, admitting that he was only saying that so he could finally take off his rose-colored glasses. After all, if he keeps playing friends with the girl, he'll end up wandering around like a dog that's been abandoned by its owner. But at that moment, to his great shock, Alexander spoke up and said that the herald must be referring to the day he was kicked out by his lover, but he only indignantly wondered what Alexander meant and why he would bring up such a thing. But he calmly continued to knit and said that the herald should have stopped torturing Roman and reflected on himself. Then said that he thought Roman was much better than the saying herald, and with a smile admitted that at least Lucy had agreed to go out with Roman, and when he was ill she had been worried about him and had come to visit him. After which she asked if he had also had such a thing with his lover. And he added that he guessed that if his girlfriend became part of their family, the herald would most likely jump out the window at such joy. At that moment, an indignant herald got up from his seat and asked. Alexander wanted to say that his girlfriend was just pretending that they were dating, and added that Rahans really loved him and she just hadn't been able to admit it to herself yet. But Alexander continued to knit and wondered if the herald had finally managed to get her consent, and said that of the two of them, the herald was the person who should take off his rose-colored glasses, because the girl obviously didn't love him. And they just played together a lot as kids, so they developed an attachment. And the guy was the one who confused love with friendship. But the indignant herald only wondered what Alexander intended to say with such talk. Looking over it all with embarrassment, Roman stated that his brothers were like dogs clashing like crazy in an argument, and it was truly an embarrassment to the entire wolf family, and thought about how he was absolutely sick of being a wolf and being one of the Baskervilles. And he wondered why he'd inherited. That's exactly what the wolf bloodline is. Because if he'd been given a choice of who to be born as, he would never have been born into the Baskerville family. Because wolves always live in packs and spend their entire lives with one partner. And Baskervilles who strongly inherited such wolf-like traits in their bloodlines had inherited diseases, such as dark eyes instead of bright ears, and a weaker heart than others, or shorter sleep time, as well as being. Another psychological fatal flaw is an unbearably intense love fever. What it means to love only one person for the rest of your life. Then the novel reflected that life was too long to love just one person, but there were too many variables in this world, And then he remembered that since his childhood he had been going to his brothers and asking them about this and that. Why love for only one person is a weakness. And then Alexander explained to him that in any case, when the time came, the boy would realize it himself, then scrutinized his worry face and informed him that his brother had an insane amount of questions, and maybe it was because of his hate and curiosity, but afterwards added that it was because not everyone in the world was like their family, because the world is full of people who don't value love and only use it for their own purposes. And besides, Roman can't make another person love him just because he loves that person. Because he loves that person. And then they really have a hard time. Then informed him that he would have to do many things to become attractive in other people's eyes before he fell in love. And it was all to do with the fact that human feelings change very quickly. Then his oldest brother said that their bloodline was their weakness. But it seems that the herald didn't agree with it at all. He considered the peculiarity of their family to be a real curse. Even if he came through a lot of difficulties and was able to fall in love with another person, there was not always a good end. So he informed his brother that life was cruel enough, so he needed to enjoy this moment while he still didn't love anyone. Thinking about his words, little Romance reasoned that for some reason the herald was certain that even if the person he loved him too, there would still be some problem. And he absolutely did not understand anything and wanted to ask his father about it. But for some reason he stopped appearing at home. But then the excited boy, being a child, realized that the reason why his father was not at home was in him. Because after he was born, his mom's health declined so much that his dad hated him immensely. And even the field began to hate him, because his beloved wife got sick because of his son. Then, thinking about it all, Roman still couldn't understand what love was. In the same year, Roman's mother died, and after this tragedy, the boy's father closed himself in a winter cottage. After all that happened, this attitude of the boy's father was perceived by the child as hatred towards him. So he constantly asked his brothers if it was true that their father did not want to see him. But his brothers each time explained that it was not so. And when the novel himself will love someone, he will certainly be able to understand the behavior of his father. And then the brother, looking back at the novel, confessed that love is very cruel, and especially in relation to the Baskervilles. But at that time, the little novel absolutely did not understand what their words meant. Eventually, after a couple more days, the herald sobbed in despair and realized that he had become completely different because of his love and had absolutely no idea what to do or how to proceed. But the Nahal knew that his beloved Rohannes is this girl with whom his brother has been friends since childhood, and it is said that their family of polar bears has produced many talented doctors. But Alexander entered the conversation and looked awkwardly and unhappily at the herald and asked why the herald had been bullying and torturing the girl all his childhood, since he realized he loved her, and wondered if his brother had any conscience at all. But the sobbing herald confessed that he himself did not understand what he was thinking and why he did that. After all, he had originally picked on the girl because she didn't like playing with other people, and he thought it was funny, but a disgruntled Alexander wondered how old the guy was, implying that he was acting like a child. Then sobbing, the herald said that it seemed to him that the girl already had a young man and it was insanely bad. And the disgruntled Romance wondered what his brother would do now, given the lineage he was from, and the fact that he would now be in agony for a long time. A crying herald asked Alexander what he should do and whether he should come to see her every day. But a disgruntled Alexander said that if the herald did something wrong, it would be considered a crime.